Hi there, welcome back to the Mindset Check podcast. I'm your host, Misha McKittrick. This is a podcast where we believe that as you take time for a mindset check, you have more power than you think you do. And this is a podcast where we also believe that the things that we feel inside, our emotions, start to show up through our body, that our body communicates to us. You guys, I'm really excited for this episode because we have a guest. We have a guest that's dropping in with us, an expert that's going to talk to us about this relationship with our emotions and our body. And I'm so pumped. Her name's Rachel Brumberger. You'll see her after I kind of read the journal entry and all of that stuff. So we're looking forward to that. Also, if you're with us for the first time, you need to know that what I do in the format for this podcast for this first season is that we're reading through my journal from when I was 15 and pregnant. And I go through a roller coaster of a relationship. I end up committing to being a young mother, and my daughter passes away at 9 months old. And we have experienced all of that in season 1 so far. And now we're kind of going through a little bit of a rocky time with my husband. And that's right where we drop into this episode. Welcome. We talk about real easy things here, right, guys? No, it's really good, and it helps us to just drop in and to have more compassion as we go through life too, because even though I'm sharing this story with you, you never know what someone else is going through. And I think checking in sometimes to things that have happened, you know, they always say that if you talk to someone long enough, then you'll see that they have a story too. And maybe sometimes when you're handling and dealing with people, they're in the middle of their story. Maybe you're in the middle of yours. But talking story always helps us. It always benefits us. There's this thing that I learned about in West Africa that is so cool, that when someone is struggling, whether it's just in life or especially in their mind, they ask, well, when's the last time they've told story? Oh, how juicy, right? Because when we tell stories, it's a sign of wellness or a sign that we're wanting to connect with those good feelings. And then that also propels us to good. And we learn so much through telling our own stories. So never forget that your story matters. Your story matters. And checking in with other people's stories helps us to be aware of or to walk the paths of more lives than just our own. And it provides compassion for us in life. And then in ways it helps us work through our own stuff, right? Our own things, even though the stories aren't the same. That's some of the most beautiful things about stories, something I'm really passionate about. And now I just want to say thank you to Groove for supporting this podcast. Groove is an all-inclusive one-stop software that includes every single software you need to run an online business. Everything from professional-looking websites, sales funnels, emails, the ability to create your own online courses, and take online orders, and more. I love Groove because it is friendly and helpful to use even if I have little to no technical knowledge. They make it easy to copy, paste, drag, drop, click, and scroll your way to the side of professionally creating your business. I also love that so many things I need to run my business are all in the same place. You can start a website with Groove for free. When you sign up for a free Groove account, you get immediate access to a website creator, funnel builder, and shopping cart software. If you have a need to simplify or start an online business, then check out Groove. You'll find a link for Groove in the show notes. As far as what you need to know for this episode, honestly, there's not a whole bunch because we're just reading one entry and it's just me, and I'm only really talking about Jesse and then this other girl that I had mentioned a couple episodes back when I found out he cheated. So I mentioned her name, but other than that, there's not really anybody else involved in this episode. You know everything you need to do. Let's dive in. April 27th, 1995. I'm so stressed out. I can't believe this. My elbows are all broke out, and every thought I start to think ends up that I'm thinking about Jesse. How sick and disgusting he is. Guess where he is? In Ogden. Last Friday, we both agreed that that would be the worst place for him to go. I wonder if he's screwed Angie yet, or any of his other beep. Jesse went to get the Dodge Colt over in Milford last week, and he parked it in my parents' driveway. Well, when I got home from work, I was just looking around, and I found his old girlfriend, Sadie's picture, by the speedometer, and I'm so pissed. Why me, and why couldn't he screw some other ugly person over? But for real, I really don't know why all of this horrible stuff is happening to me. Why? In all capitals. Why? ? Ooh. There is so much just in this one-page entry. There's so much, and so much of it we've talked about. We've talked about how much all of our energy affects other people around us. We've talked about, getting into these negative spirals and focusing on all the worst. And we've talked about needing to process all of those things that we see as the worst, right? We need to be in it long enough to let it ride out. And I feel like that's part of the state that I'm in. I feel like there's also another side of this conversation, which we've also talked about, which is, why am I in this state vibrationally? And all of those are good, juicy, and incredible conversations. When I really zoom the lens out and I go, okay, from this one episode, it's been, January, February, March, April. So it's been 3 months since my daughter passed away. And my husband, that I'm completely, really, really dedicating my life to, and granted, I vacillate on these, I'm feeling negative and I've got a lot of energy there and sadness, but there's a lot happening to me too. I love however many episodes back when my mom was like, you were really just giving what you had, what you were being given and dished out as well. And so I get that, because we do need to teach ourselves something different, which is why this, and what the whole podcast is about. Because if we can expose ourselves to something more, then we can do something more. I think it was, it was just 5 days before this that I found out that he, had been cheating on me right and left. And then all of a sudden he's in Ogden and away from me again. But yet we had agreed that we would be, we had agreements made that Ogden would be the worst place for him. And so you can see we're vacillating between one of the episodes I wrote, we're getting divorced for sure. And now I'm in this place of being concerned about where he's at. Finding myself just constantly thinking about him. Oh, it's just, there's a lot. And so you understand completely why I started by saying I'm so stressed out, and why in the end, especially for a 16-year-old girl, saying, why is this happening to me? And it doesn't matter if you're 16 or if you're 42 or 3005. If you're wondering why that happened to you and you're looking for answers, I'm commending you right now, because it's not easy. But when you look and find the answers and you start to experience knowledge and you start to experience expansion and understanding and things like this in your life that can lend you wisdom and lead you in the right directions, I am commending you 100%. This episode was really interesting for me because I feel like I've really gone over a lot of things about stress. There was an episode we especially focused on stress, which was episode 37, Shake Off Stress. And we go over tactics on how to deal with and handle stress, and so many good and juicy things. And we've talked in other episodes about how emotions surface and show themselves on our body, on the outside, in the way that our body is functioning, and how, we reference that book a lot, Feelings Buried Alive Never Die. And as I started thinking about this episode, I was really struck by the way that my body was starting to get these bumps on my elbows. And I know that I had gone to the doctor back when I lived in Ogden. So remember, I moved home from Ogden in November. So this could have been 6 months prior. I went to the doctor in Ogden and I had those bumps on my elbows. Gosh, now I'm questioning if it was Ogden, but I know it was like previous, because I can remember having the cream in Ogden. That's why I can remember it needing to be in the fridge and to go upstairs to use it. But I had these bumps on my elbows, and when I went into the doctor to ask about them, I learned that they were caused by stress. And they gave me a cream and sent me out the door. And so I really wanted to focus on, in this episode, how our bodies manifest what we're experiencing on the inside of our emotions. And so I reached out to a friend because I wanted to invite an expert in the area to talk to us and to teach us whatever more we could learn to expand our ideas, our thoughts, our knowledge around all of it. And so I have a colleague, her name's Rachel Brumberger. She is such a rock star. And I invited her to come and sit with us and to kind of talk about these bumps on my elbows and how emotions manifest in our body. This girl, she's seriously amazing. She's a master acupuncturist. She's an herbalist, Chinese nutritional therapy practitioner, and a wellness coach. She specializes in women's health, digestive disorders, and mental health conditions. In addition to her clinical practice, she writes, she hosts the Healing and Wellbeing podcast that's called Unscripted, and an adjunct and clinical faculty member at the Maryland University of Integrative Health. So she's got an extensive repertoire, if you will. And for me, I just knew, and I felt at my soul level, like I should reach out to Rachel and ask her how much she focuses on emotions and how they show up in the body, because I know she does. And when I reached out to her, she said it's my main focus. So here my friend Rachel is, and she's talking to us. We're going to drop into the conversation right when we start talking about these stress bumps on my elbows. And they gave me a cream and sent me out the door.
And that was it.
Yeah.
We'll give you a cream for your stress.
Yeah.
I think I'll just say for everyone listening, the first thing is so many of our providers would love to dig into that and don't have the time or the resourcing to be able to not just hand us a cream and send us on our way and maybe sprinkle in the concept of like counseling or, and it's like they don't, and that is hard because it's like you get this dropped in like, hey, your body and your emotions, they're partners, but then you don't know what to do with it. Maybe a lot of us don't know what to do with that information.
Well, it's just that we're not taught it.
We're not
taught
we're
it.
kind of actually taught the opposite. So we're now learning to undo what we were trained to ignore and sort of cover up. And we're trying to learn how to dig into it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So what can you tell us? I just feel like there's so much juice behind understanding that our emotions really do show up in our body.
Yes.
And it is like, you have so much background in this. And I think that there's so many approaches to this. We can talk about, how do we deal with it? How do we handle it? How do we diagnose,
right,
what it is and where it's coming from? And how do we learn to kind of do the however many point check of our body and kind of make sure we're staying in health. But ultimately, what would you, because there's also like, why, like I asked the question at the end of the journal entry, why is this happening to me?
Yes.
There's a vibrational conversation.
I feel like there's a lot packed in this.
Yeah.
it may look like a paragraph of life, but it's like,
Yeah.
it's not. It's so
Yeah.
dynamic. So let's kind of take that each way. I think the first thing to sort of have all of us come back into resonance with is that we do not have a mind, a body, an emotional life, and a spirit. These are all one thing.
Mm.
And when we say spirit, it's just like we're imbued with life. That's really all I mean. It's like we have been blessed into a body, we've been born into it. And so we have this sort of spark of life. That's what I'm talking about. And so a lot of us have been sort of trained to think, if I get what's happening in my head is only happening in my head, or what's happening in my body is only happening in my body, or what's happening in my emotional universe is only there. That's not true, because we are all one. There's no way. And an easy example of this, because sometimes it's easier to go from body to emotions versus the other way. Like if somebody gets a pretty significant injury and now cannot participate in their life the way that they typically do, like they can't meet their friends once a week anymore, or they're out for the season, or they lose their college their college scouting opportunity, or we know we will eventually have that ailment in our emotions. It may have shown up in our meniscus or our shoulder, or but when we don't feel well, whether that's an injury or someone's been sick for a while, we do start to not be able to participate in our life fully. And then we feel the emotional impact of that. So why would it not be the other way around? Of course, it's always going to be both. And when we're under a lot of stress, and especially if somebody's in a kind of pressure cooker situation, like they have to keep it together, especially at that time in your life where you have your own grief process happening. You are trying to take care of yourself. You're dealing with this. How are you going to set your life up after all these events and relationships and this change and your motherhood status and all that? And you're trying to keep it all together, right? And people have so much to manage. If that emotion can't come out on the breath all the way, it's going to come out some other way. It's going to be vented by the body. In your case, a rash. In somebody else, it could be asthma. They could throw their back out. They could have digestive stuff, like lots of people have sensitive abdomen stuff when they're feeling stressed out. So when we aren't able to let that full emotional wave continue to crest and crest and crest and move, because emotional waves keep coming when we have big stuff going on. It's not like, well, I did the big cry or I did the big yell. Why am I still upset? I mean, they come like waves. It will take as long as it takes for us to fully express what we're dealing with at the time. If we aren't able to kind of have those full expressions for any reason, they'll show up in the body too. And interestingly, that it was your elbows, I think that's fascinating, because the content of that beautiful and super vulnerable entry is, there's a lot about self-worth in there, and like what happened in my relationship, and why am I enough, and why don't you know it, and why is this happening to me? Like this kind of dealing of worthiness, right? This dealing of like, and where do I belong in the world? And is it always going to be like this? That the channels in our acupuncture channels, like the G meridians that come through the elbows, are the ones that are part of the heart channels, and also the lungs and the large intestine. So there's a lot about this sort of our actual ability to show up fully present and feel loved and feel valuable, and then to be able to let go of what doesn't serve us, or to deal with real loss, to deal with that which is precious and no longer here in this present moment. Right. And you were holding so much of that.
Oh, you're like, yes, you're so touching that.
Right.
It's so true, because even just to talk about the condition of my heart at that time. Wow.
Right. And so this is this gathering point. There's this sea of energy in the elbow. both of them, of course. And, there are different seeds where, if you think of the body, like you think of the earth, we have streams, we have ponds, we have oceans. So some of these larger articulations that we have are where things pool.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you get a rash in your
Yeah.
elbow? Like, why wouldn't that be a place where your body is able to kind of vent this upset when it's so much to hold? And no matter how many people you have to love you, to listen, to let you cry into their arms, it's massive.
Yeah.
It's like glacially massive emotions you were holding.
Mm-hmm.
So, and even if you were amazing at letting them go, even to your journal, even sharing them, it's just a lot for one little body to have going on.
Exactly.
It's got to come out in a multitude of ways. Yeah. And that's one of them.
So I have a couple of questions just based on what you've said, and to really clarify it for our listener. I'm wondering, so does that mean that everything that manifests in our body then has like a connecting point to something that's going on, right? So like if something's showing up in my hip, right? Does that then mean XYZ? Do you know what I'm saying? What can you say about that?
I think I love that. First of all, I love how you worded this. And I love that you happen to say the word always, because I think always is a place where we want to listen carefully to ourselves. I will never say something is always a particular, very rarely will I be like, it's always X, it's always Y. I think it's important for all of us to start as we mend that sort of mind, body, emotion, spirit relationship, like as we bring ourselves back to whole in that way, to ask ourselves, what else is happening with me? It's a check-in process. So if my hip is bothering me, per your example, it absolutely could be I ran too much in tennis and didn't stretch. It totally could be a very physiological,
right?
We didn't stretch, we were dehydrated, we were a little tired, slept funny, anything like that, right? It could be something left over, like we were an athlete in younger years and it just sort of wore on some of our flesh suit parts, right? So there are totally physiological things that show up as physio, or somebody like if the dog actually knocked you over or something, right? Hips, however, often are places where we do carry a lot of agitation and frustration, maybe pent up anger or upset. So I always do encourage people that when we notice this part of my body hurts or is itchy or hot or uncomfortable or etc., all of we say pain, what we really mean is I'm uncomfortable. And I'm uncomfortable could look like, laid up in bed healing something that really hurts too bad to move. And it could also be like, I always get this rash in this one place. So it could run the gamut of severity in terms of how does it manifest, but to ask, what else is happening in my universe right now? And how am I doing with all that? So I will say to people to start to make that connection is one easy way to do it is if you have an emotion that you notice is to say to myself, where do I feel that in my body? So we can start immediately making. So if I, get off of an upsetting phone call and I notice I feel really disappointed, to be like, where is that showing up in my body? What part of my body just lit up with that emotion? And then vice versa. If my hip is bothering me and it's not, and I look at, okay, I didn't sleep weird. I've been doing my routine is pretty common for me. Is there anything else happening in my universe right now? How am I doing with my family? How am I doing with myself? How am I doing with all the people I engage with? Is anything upsetting me that I haven't been able to fully acknowledge, even just with maybe I haven't had time to just be with myself about it. Or be honest about it. Because sometimes I think a lot of us are holding so much. Sometimes we don't even know we have permission to be honest with ourselves about the real feelings, right?
Yeah.
And that can then give us a lot of insight about why that hip. What is also happening in my emotional universe and what stories have I made about it? Which I know is something juicy. You talk about too.
Yeah, because that's
regularly.
Where we meet, right? That's where we meet. That's our story and our mind and all that stuff.
Yes.
One thing that I would love to hear you address, and I know that this is going to be a multifaceted question, because what do we do about it, right? So we have a pain, we do the inventory,
Yes.
or we just see something surfacing. And for some people, this is really deep. It's like,
Yes.
it's like they're autoimmune. It's their whole life. It's like everything's being thrown. And for some people, it's a little pain in the hip, like we talked about, you know? And I feel like it's important to be able to, and for this 15-year-old girl,
Right.
it's true heartache. It's true showing up in a way of not being wanted, but trying to find your own grounding inside of that. And your heart broken for this little girl, and there's just so much inside of that. And so that's why I say multifaceted, because there's a lot of different angles of it. But that's, so when we come down to it, what do we do about it?
What do we do?
What then?
So I think, so like we just talked about it, I love that you said the word inventory. So it is important for us to train ourselves. We're practicing to learn to do that self inventory. And I think it's generally easiest for people to check on their physical stuff first. Like, just do the inventory on like water, food, sleep, basic needs, right?
Yeah.
And then, because that kind of that can invite some safety, especially if we're new at this. For the next level of inventory is, how am I feeling about my life and my situation and the people and my work, my play, my everything, right? So the second tier of inventory is that checking on our emotional and mental stuff. And once we've identified it, sometimes, and I feel like this is definitely things I've heard you allude to, it's like sometimes just seeing it in ourselves is all we need, because the light of consciousness sort of just lets it all move. And that moment where we just see where we are and we have an honest moment that's safe and for us to have, even if it feels unsafe to feel the feeling, like even if we're freaked out about the feeling, that we had an opportunity to be honest with ourselves can just kind of be enough. And there may be nothing else to do about it. It may just be to be with and look for where it shows up in the future, and it becomes more familiar. And as we see the familiarity, we start using all the tools that you've been talking about this entire season, that all of us wellness folks are talking about all the time, in terms of, now what do I do next time? Next time, maybe I will journal. Next time, maybe I will call a therapist. Next time, I will just go to the person and tell them how I feel, or lay out my boundary, or, depending on what it is. So sometimes once we see it, there's nothing to do but just respect that it happened and see ourselves as a little more whole. Sometimes, like you said, especially if there's kind of a big, especially with autoimmune stuff, but certainly any nagging disharmony in our body that's just showing up and up again, we want to treat it. And we have a lot of options on how to do that. We have holistic providers of all kinds. So whether that's your massage therapist or a naturopath or an acupuncturist, where you go to your physician and you just say, can we have a more holistic conversation, because I'm not sure where to go from here. That's one first step. We also have counseling and coaching, which I think, or groups, especially for grief, there's lots of groups that maybe we feel comfortable going to, maybe we don't, but there's for every big emotion I've ever come into counter with, there's someone hosting a group of other people. There's help, there's helpers. And so it may feel more safe to do that kind of in a peer group and just hear other people's stories. I actually do think it's really helpful to literally write ourselves a permission slip to have the feeling. Like that's something that we're allowed to do, and we can do very, very privately if we're just getting into it and we don't know how to go to our friends yet or our other loved ones. So there's just some do things. And I think that there's also a lot of material to read out there so we can get more comfortable with kind of exploring this emotional level at a deeper pace.
Yes.
And I mean, there's a lot. We could probably, maybe we'll put together a list of where are some of those things to go read.
Yeah.
I think that I think it really depends on like what is the physiology doing? Because sometimes the other part of this that I think people may find helpful to hear, so that we don't blame for the one, let's not blame ourselves for the emotion and the pain we're now in. It's our bodies are not actually against us. It may appear like that sometimes. Like, wow, now I have all this big emotional stress and my body's just totally mad at me. Well, no, actually, that's not it. Our bodies are actually desperately always trying to support us in our expression. So usually when that pain, whether it's full body or not, is pinging at us over and over again, it's because it's the only language the body has. Right? I mean, if I was fluent in Japanese and so was my body, we could just sit down and have a chat about it. But I'm not. And so my body has to use something else. It has to pick another language, and the language is discomfort.
Yeah, I've actually been grateful for pain at times, because then it's the indicator that something's wrong and you need to do something about it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting when we bring emotions into the equation, and I love how you stated basically do the inventory of the why or what that's happening, because then it's then that you can decide all of these different options. Like maybe you just need to acknowledge it and say to yourself, it's okay that you're feeling that, and notice it. Because, sometimes, so I brought up my hip because my hip actually has really been bothering me.
It's a real one.
It's real. and I feel like, I've looked at other catalogs, and it was like the one of the things was talking about how when you're trying to make big decisions and that kind of sits in your hip.
It does, because it's the same.
Right.
So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you,
it's
but
okay.
Mish, the channels that run through the hips that are also responsible for sort of holding on to how do we course through actually frustration, are also responsible for how do we make great choices for ourselves when we have a vision for where we want to be and how do we want to get there in anything. Same channel. Same part of the body. So, yeah, for sure.
But the thing that was so validating to hear you say is that maybe you just acknowledge it, because maybe I'm not going to make that decision today. And maybe I am saying to myself, like, I'm in the process of making that decision. So here I am supporting myself through that.
Yes.
And just the acknowledgement that it's happening is amazing. And then, like you said, maybe there's these other things. Maybe it's like you have always talked to me about just needing to process the emotion. Like, let the emotion come. So many people run from that.
Yes.
They run and they're so scared to feel it.
Yeah. And I think we feel scared because also we're lonely and we don't know if we open the floodgates, if it'll ever stop. Like I remember feeling, I've always had, this is a real example because I think authenticity matters. Like, I have a hard time crying when I need a good cry. It's hard. And it's not like, I remember being a really little kid and sort of training myself out of letting people into that because I felt so like I needed privacy and it wasn't always available. Who knows why I felt I needed that.
Sure.
We could go into it. I've looked at it. But what has resulted is that sometimes when I want to release, I actually physically, my body's still trying to protect me from being scared about that. And I have looked at it a lot. And I remember at one point saying to a provider, like, if it all came out, what if I was just crying all day long about everything? Like, what if it never stopped? That's one common fear is that once the floodgates open, all of the stuff we've been holding together will just fall apart. Any of the emotions. Lots of people are scared of anger and expressing it because we all have lots of stories about why that could be. All of the emotions, even joy makes some people are actually nervous in the presence of a lot of joy because that showed up as something else in their life, childhood, that then kind of just got too big or too loud or too boisterous or scary for some other reason. So even some of the positive emotions can be scary for people.
Interesting.
So I'm glad you said that.
But yeah, basically just the basic equation of like, there is something going on. Let's pay attention to it. And then let's go through some different steps that you could take in analyzing, you know, that what it is and what can I do about it.
Right.
And helping your body see that you are in connection with it, doing what you can to support it. Yeah. And that's the whole picture. You're doing what you can to support yourself emotionally. You're doing what you can to support your body by taking care of yourself through those channels. And and I loved what you said about my body hates me right now, because I've heard a lot of people say things like that. And that is such a betrayal when you really break it down. Like, you say it just off cuff like it means nothing, but it really means everything.
It means everything. And our bodies actually believe everything we tell them. So if we're in a fight with our body about these signals that it's trying to send us, like, and we're like, oh, my body hates me, our bodies will be like, they'll be in strife because we're in strife. And then there will be bigger, more uncomfortable signals. So we want to make amends. We want to make friends with the pain. I'm not saying to resign to it and be like, oh, we're friends now, and I can't deal with, I don't have to, that's not,
or welcome, you can stay as long as you want. That's not the conversation.
That's not the conversation. It's definitely not a resignation, and it's not a backing off of loving ourselves by being like, I'm friends with my pain. It's not. It's actually a looking at, how do we partner, and what am I trying to learn for myself? One thing, actually, an activity that is really useful, if somebody gets, like, you get to this acknowledgement moment, you're like, okay, this is a thing for me. I have said emotion. I kind of know what it's about. Maybe I'm still a little confused about what it's about, because of course that can happen. Sometimes things are so nuanced. We have a lot to pick apart in one life event. Is to write a letter to yourself from your body. So in the case of, using, like, we could use our immune system, we could use our hip, we could use our elbow, we could use our asthma, we could use our eye twitching. It's basically, dear Rachel, hey, it's me, your hip. I have some things I want to share with you. And then you just kind of if you can, you let yourself just write. Don't think, just see what your pencil and pen do. If you have to type it, that's okay. I like the hand to paper because it lets your brain really, like, there's that, and there is something about the pathways we create and stress, and like getting it onto paper and out of our bodies, which is not exactly the same on our computers, but hey, do what's comfortable. And just write that letter. Well, you may find something incredible comes out of that. It could be something as gentle and simple as, I'm super tired, and why do we keep overriding our rest? Like, why, sweetheart, are we doing that? Like, it's time to rest. And it could also be like, I know this is massively uncomfortable, but you're pissed off at your sister and you got to deal with it. It could be, you love her anyway, and I know this is uncomfortable and it's hurting, so let's handle it. How can I support you? That could be what shows up. So there's like this amazing dynamic possibility of when we tune in and let ourselves have that dialogue, even on paper, we can learn from ourselves. And that can be a to-do, because it may give us insight as to the next place to go for support. I'm also a big proponent of, do get the body work, because just because it's happening in the emotional realm and showing up in the body, you can treat it both ways. Helping our bodies will still help the emotion, and vice versa.
Yeah. And you know what I loved too? When you were AKA like hypothetically writing the letter, you were talking to yourself like darling and sweetheart.
Yeah.
And I think that when we approach ourselves as the beautiful beings and the souls that we are, where we're actually going to sit down and address ourselves, we're not going to say, why do you hate me so bad, or language like that. We're going to say, I'm in recognition of what you're doing and who you are and your function. And, like, it's just so beautiful, the space that we turn the corner in holding when we decide to actually sit down and do the addressing.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
And if we hold ourselves the way we would hold someone much younger, our younger self, a child we know, that compassion, if we hold our bodies that way, and we let our bodies hold us that way. So You can write also the letter to your body. I'm really confused. Tell me more about this pain. Why do we keep getting so sick? What is happening? Help me out. That dialogue can go both ways. And I think the most important thing though is to have the dialogue.
That's beautiful.
To be allowed to have it.
Yeah. Gives you the space to actually do the inventory that we're talking about and ask why and all the things, and then figure out what your action steps are from there. That will make a difference if you show up that way. It's so beautiful. Yeah, I love it. I wanted to ask you, what do we give off when we choose to ignore it? What do we give off? What do we create? What happens?
Yeah. So I think that's a really amazing question. It's multifaceted. So the first thing that happens is our body will get louder and louder and louder. So one of the few alwayses that I'll call a universal truth is the body always wins. That's to me non-negotiable. If we ignore it, things will get louder and more painful until we have what it seems we have no choice but to give in. And that may look like getting so ill or so incapacitated that we have to call out of work. We have a lot of appointments. There are ways that the body will just, in service to us, get louder and louder and louder. So that's one. And then there's our resonance with the rest of the world that we're generating and participating in, right? So if we are ignoring what's happening in our full universe, we're going to put that out. So we're going to start getting it more from other places. I think this is a lot of like physics ultimately and some metaphysics, like, if, so for example, one thing can be when we're really uncomfortable is we're kind of like looking for company of other people that are uncomfortable, right? If we're not doing the exploration of how to resolve the dis-ease that we're in, we're going to generate our relationships with everybody complaining about all the discomfort we're in, just complaining about it, not really doing anything productive with it. And suddenly we may find ourselves in lots of situations where it's kind of heavy, negative, and painful, and everyone's just sort of dumping that into the collective, and we're now like eating it everywhere. It's just like everywhere we are is everyone's sort of moans and groans about things that won't resolve. So we'll kind of make more of it in lots of places.
Yeah.
And then we'll be carrying more of it in lots of places.
Yes. I loved that answer from Rachel at the end, because I feel like I see people go through life and they avoid their things, and they avoid handling it. And I love examples from nature, right? And I learned something about a tomato worm. I learned that when a tomato plant is in trouble and it lacks nutrients and it's in a weakened condition, it will send out a certain odor. And it's very distinctive to the tomato worm. And it isn't long after that the tomato worm infests the tomato plant. And if left unchecked, it destroys it. So I love these kind of the peek into something that happens naturally to apply it to our lives, simply because there's freedom on the other side. If we handle it, love ourselves through it. I love that side and that feeling that we get from Rachel of truly loving ourselves through it. I loved how she talked about, and I said this already, but I just love how she talked about validating, recognizing, and sometimes that's all we need to do. So take just a minute to do that inventory. Take a minute to look at ways that you validate or invalidate what you are feeling, or even if you're helping a child or a teen or someone in your life reframe a situation, Sometimes we skip so quickly past it because we have the solution. I know I'm super guilty of that. That's like those are my instincts. That's my personality. And I do need to remember to stop, slow down, and validate feelings. I know you're nervous. I know, that sometimes you imagine worst case scenarios, but a lot of times those things aren't true. Or, I know that you're having difficulty making this decision, and I just want you to know I have your back. There's just so much validation in validating, right? You feel like you're seen, like you're heard, like you're recognized. And imagine that's how your body feels too. Oh, that's so good. I love Rachel's advice. And one thing that I love so much about Rachel, we actually do a lot of business coaching and things like that together. And I love how when one of us is stuck or we're struggling, and she'll take us to the emotion. She'll help us focus on what it is instead of running from it and trying to fix it and patch it. And it reminds me of this story about how pearls are made, and a story of a man that became one of the richest men in the world. And he experimented and worked until he found out how to produce pearls in mass production, and then thereby produce genuine pearl necklaces at such a rapid rate that he cornered the market on pearls, and he became one of the richest men in the world. He discovered that if he took baby oysters and opened one of them up and cut it up into 15 pieces, and then took some mother of pearl that's only found at the bottom of the Mississippi River, and then gently inserted that into a live oyster, and then covered it with one of the 15 pieces of the baby oyster that he had cut up, something unusual happened. Now the challenge was to make sure that he inserted the mother of pearl and then, the piece of the baby oyster ever so gently without irritating or disturbing the oyster too much. Because if that happened, then the oyster would quickly die. But if he was successful, then he could accelerate the making of pearls. If he was successful in the accomplishment of very gently doing this, he would put the oyster back into the seawater alive, and he would keep them for several weeks. And then at the end of that time, he took them out of the water and he opened them up, and he found a large and beautiful pearl had been created. And I think that sometimes in life, things come into our life and they irritate us and disturb us, and we, have problems and issues. And that is the nature of life, But I want you to remember that sometimes when we get irritated, we have the opportunity to make pearls. And we have the ability to grow, to become something really beautiful. So really take to heart some of the things that Rachel taught us today. All of the ways that we do that inventory and try to listen to ourselves. And where we really do those exercises, like writing the letter or journaling about it and trying to figure out what it is we need. Do we need to be validated? Do we need a professional's help? Do we need, all of the things? I hope that you see that when our bodies talk to us through something that maybe we don't desire, that it opens the door into the ability for us to listen to ourselves and to discover something new. And in that, I hope you see that you have more power than you think you do. Such a huge thank you to Rachel for coming and chatting with us. I hope you guys liked that. I hope you liked that we invited someone on the outside to kind of lend more understanding and more thought towards an area that we're trying to understand. I love how Rachel is so interested in exploring the human experience with other like-hearted people. She's amazing. make sure you check out her podcast, Unscripted. And I will link her podcast also in the show notes so you can find it easily, very quickly. Also, this podcast can grow with your help. If you think this information is helpful, if you really think that it's helping you move forward through life, then I would love for you to help other people find it. And you can do that by making sure that you're subscribed to the show and leaving a review. It sounds silly, but you typing just a few sentences helps the algorithm suggest this podcast to people who might be needing it the same way that you do. Also, don't forget that you can always reach out to me, send me your thoughts, anything that you're thinking or questions that you have at hello@myfriendmisha. You can also DM me on Instagram, myfriendmisha, or you can find me on Facebook as myfriendmisha as well. We also have our mindset check for the Facebook group for this podcast, which is a really fun space as well. And lastly, I just want to thank you for, again, letting me walk through a part of your journey with you today. I just wanted to leave you with this one quote from Joe Dispenza. He says, "No doubt what you're creating inside of you begins to create what is outside of you." Until next time, my friend.